Hey, well, thank you all for joining us today for Building STEM Skills Through Projects After School with Jeffrey Imrich from Rock by Rock. Jeffrey has been a leader in education for 20 years and is the co-founder and CEO of Rock by Rock, a K through 5 project-based learning platform that provides educators and students equitable access to project-based learning experiences. Um, we at the network, we work to increase access to high quality after school, summer, and other expanded learning opportunities. We are one of 50 state after school networks working in conjunction with the National After School Alliance to improve systems of support for after school programs. We are the lead state for the National After School Association, working to improve both program and job quality for professionals in the after school workforce. And we are the state lead for the National Girls Collaborative Project, working to increase equity in STEAM programming. And our goal for hosting these STEAM skills webinars is to showcase the quality of STEAM curriculum and resources being conducted in New York State, sharing these resources with New York State educators in the community, and connecting educators and STEAM professionals with each other to enhance the STEAM community in New York. So thank you again for joining, and I'm going to pass it over to Jeff to get started.
Okay, so Abby, thank you for a wonderful introduction. Like Abby said, I am Jeff Emmerich. I'm one of the co-founders of Rock by Rock, and I'm a former public school teacher myself who has worked subsequently in teacher support and development. I've also worked at the district level, supporting schools to innovate on their programming to be more personalized and project-based, including enhancing STEM project-based learning. And that has included both in-school and after-school components. And one of the things that we have found, especially when it comes to working with STEM, is that planning project-based learning experiences can be hard and complicated. Kids love it, teachers love it, families love it, and it can be difficult to plan. We've also found that when teachers maybe have a little less experience or don't see themselves as science people because maybe they don't have a background in STEM, there can be some reluctance in wanting to take it on because, like, do I know the content? Can I do it? It just feels a little bit riskier. And so, what we're gonna do today is I'm gonna share some ideas and strategies that can help support project-based learning in STEM in after school. And we're going to start by doing a little bit of norming together, like why project-based learning? What do we mean when we say project-based learning? And then what are some strategies to implement and move towards a more project-based approach in STEAM and after school? And Rock by Rock, we're also, I'm going to share my screen now. So Abby, can you just confirm that it's visible? Okay, great. Thank you. So what we're going to do is spend a little time identifying the components of a strong project-based program, identify ways to structure that programming that can build STEM skills, and then some low-lift strategies to start to integrate STEM-based project-based learning into your program. Now, Rock by Rock, we're a library of fully planned project-based experiences that you can use in K through 5, and 6 through 8 is under development. And they're basically ready to go out of the box experiences that blend online and hands-on learning. And at the end of our webinar, if you're interested, we'll have the ability to set you and your teams up for full access for the rest of the year as a free trial if you'd like. But our time is going to be spent mostly on these strategies and less on like a demo of Rock by Rock. Um, so just to start, and I apologize, I had the flu 7 weeks ago and my voice isn't fully back yet. So if I sound like an adolescent at some point with my voice cracking, that's why. Um, Okay, so this is a quote from the World Economic Forum. In 2040, two-thirds of today's 5-year-olds will be in jobs that don't exist today. And unless our system radically,
Yeah, right.
they
That's
will
what I
not be prepared for those jobs. And I share this quote because I'm just curious, how many folks on the call have used ChatGPT? A bit. Okay. Yep. So I used it a little bit and now I'm starting to use it more. The first time I used I had this moment where I was like, is this how my grandparents felt the first time they saw television? Where it was like, oh, I feel like I just looked through a window to the future and everything is about to change and I'm inspired and I'm scared. But like I think this quote also highlights the fact that the skills we're going to need in the future are really different from some of the skills that we may draw on us heavily now. And so currently, a majority of employers are saying that when kids graduate K-12 in college, they're not fully prepared for the workforce because they need analytical thinking, creative thinking, flexibility, self-awareness, curiosity, dependability, empathy, leadership. These are all skills that sometimes it's harder to teach when we're focused on some of the accountability measures we're being held accountable to in the K-8 classroom. These are also many of the skills that kids are going to need to develop to thrive in an AI empowered world where critical thinking and teamwork are so much more important. Also, though, a lot of these are skills that after school programs do really well because they're able to focus on things that kids might not normally get during the typical school day. So, challenge and opportunity. It's also really important to start these at a young age because these are mental muscles that develop over time and they have compounding interest, right? So you put $100 in the bank in 2000, you're going to have more than if you put $100 in the bank in 2010. The same thing is true for these skills when we start to develop them in children. The reason we're focusing on STEM and project-based learning is one of the best ways to start to grow these authentic skills with students. Um, Abby, would you read this quote for us, please? Nice and loud.
The project-based learning right here.
Yeah, the definition.
Project-based learning is an approach to teaching where students learn by actively engaging in real-world and personally meaningful projects for an extended period of time.
Okay. Now I know we're on a webinar and webinars tend to be a little more presentation and a little less interactive. But for those of you who are able to come off mute, I'm curious, what parts of this definition do you think are most important and why? And there's not a right answer here.
Louis here. I would say that actively engaging in real world really sticks out to me because it focuses on the student-led component of PBL.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you. Anyone want to make a case for a different word or phrase?
Well, I think I would jump in and say I think personally meaningful is also important because it's always great if you can relate what they're doing kind of back to the person because then they'll kind of take it in.
Yeah. Awesome. Anyone else? The one thing that we haven't highlighted yet is the extended period of time piece. Um, and this is something that I think when I was teaching early on, I thought I was doing project-based learning, but really what I was doing was activities. So like I would do a science experiment and like, great, we did a project today. And actually like the one-off activity isn't really project-based because it needs to happen towards a really like something real world, right? So I'm focusing on something that can make an impact in the world. It has to matter to me and it has to be something I care about. And I need to do it over a period of time because there are benefits that come with studying something repeatedly in depth and engaging at a deep level that you don't get when you do a series of disconnected topics. So, like for example, the critical thinking and analytical thinking mean more when you have a chance to apply them over something you're studying deeply than something you're engaging with at the surface level. And then also we know that when kids study one topic in depth, it actually builds word and world knowledge faster than when they study it in isolation. So it's a nice side benefit of this, in addition to STEM, is that kids are going to grow vocabulary and word knowledge that supports comprehension when we go deep. So thank you for sharing that. When we think about project-based learning, it really can be used in a lot of different places. Um, as part of being real world, we think of project-based learning that supports literacy, science, and life habits, or these like durable career-ready skills, all in one bundle. So kids are getting all of those. What we're going to do today is we're going to double click a little bit on some of the strategies, particularly related to STEM. But when we think about projects, we think about kind of an interdisciplinary approach, in part because in our jobs, we don't think about science in isolation from reading, and we don't do math problems in isolation from the budget we need to do. And so if in the real world we put the pieces together, we want to give kids a chance to put the pieces together also. So we think about project-based learning as a journey, and it's kind of like a leadership journey or a problem-solving journey of discovery for kids. And it starts with a real-world mission, which is a clear project, question, problem that kids are going to sink their teeth into that they want to solve. It ends with kids doing something to take action in the form of a project that can make impact and then reflecting on what they learned. And then in the middle, there's a bunch of engagement where kids are learning about the content and forming a perspective. And I'm curious if anyone on the call wants to posit why do you think we bookend the learning with a real world mission and then end it with the take action project? Give you a hint. Some of them were called out in the definition. Okay, we might not be able to come off mute now, so I'm going to share a little bit. But like we said in the definition, like we really want kids to have a meaningful purpose that they believe in. And so we start with the real world mission and we want it to feel authentic and applicable to their lives. The mission gives the project a really clear why. Why am I doing this? Why do I care? The take action, where kids do something at the end of the project to solve the problem or present what they learned to others so others can take action, is what actually makes it authentic in real world. Because if I make the thing and it doesn't go anywhere, then I may have done something that has to do with the real world, but it didn't actually impact the real world. So the take action project is the thing that actually helps kids feel like, oh, I did that. Like I did something that made ripples in the world that's going to impact someone or someone somehow in a positive way. And then in the middle, this is where we get to grapple with the STEM content. How are we using science and practices to help kids understand the problem that they're trying to solve? That also means that if we want to focus on science skills, we need to pick missions that have a scientific purpose or understanding. Um, and so I'm going to give you some examples of some missions in a second. But before we do that, I want to sort of ground us in like why would we choose to do project-based learning as part of our after-school programming? And then how does that relate to STEM? And so first of all, like, and there might be more here. We have enrichment, extension, exposure, and remediation, right? Like one reason to choose to do projects that incorporate STEM would be to provide choice offerings for kids to explore areas of interest, right? You have passions you want to go more deeply in and pursue, projects can be a great way to do that. Another can be extension, right? You might want to provide extended learning to build on the STEM concepts taught during the school day. Maybe kids are only getting science once or twice a week in your elementary school program, and this is an opportunity for after school to support that in a meaningful way. Exposure, right? Like providing projects that draw on kids' experience, but also expose them to new things, can build students' horizons about what's possible, both in terms of content, but also expose them to STEM concepts and careers. We have a lot of kids who engage in our projects, and they're like, "I didn't know that was a job." Right? Like that's something I might want to do someday. And the last thing is remediation, right? Like we may have students who need additional support, and a lot of after school programs have an academic component where kids are getting different at-bats with things they need to practice. And this can be a way to remediate STEM content or skills that kids might need more support with. Um, it can also be a way to support literacy through STEM content. And so you can kind of get double duty there depending on what your remediation needs are. So when we're thinking about building on science and STEM, one way to think about that is focusing on certain standards. Now, the standards are going to be really important if we're thinking about extension or remediation, because we want to build on the standards during the school day. If we're using project-based learning for enrichment or exposure, the standards don't matter as much because we're not focused on the standards as an outcome. So, but if we are focused on the standards as an outcome, one way to think about it would be to focus on the standard. Another way to think about it would be to focus on the components of the standard. And so for New York State science, New York has largely adopted the NGSS standards. And as we know, the NGSS science standards draw on three different components: science and engineering practices, disciplinary core ideas, and cross-cutting concepts. Cross-cutting concepts tend to be things you stitch together unit to unit because you're reinforcing concepts. So they're a little less present in one project at a point in time. So what we're going to focus on today a little bit is the SEPs and the DCIs. So many of you are probably familiar with this, but a disciplinary core idea are the fundamental ideas that are necessary in a science discipline. It's kind of like shorthand for content and concepts. So here's an example. Animals have body parts that capture and convey different kinds of info needed for growth and survival, and animals respond to those inputs with behaviors that help them survive. Plants also respond to external inputs, right? Like we could have a project that's really focused on building kids' content and concepts if they're coming in with world knowledge gaps. And so we could do a whole unit just on different animals and body parts and what that means for growth and survival, building the concept, the content. Another way to think about it is skills and practices. So the science and engineering practices are the practices are what skilled students do to make sense of the information in the DCIs. So the SEPs reflect major practices that science and engineers use to investigate the world and build and design systems. So this could be developing and using models, conducting an investigation, answering and asking questions, analyzing and interpreting data. Now, you can't really interpret data if you don't have data to look at, and having data to look at kind of requires that you have some content and concepts to work with. So they're not done in isolation, but project-based learning is a great way to help kids practice STEM skills. It's also a great way to reinforce the STEM content, which if you look at, here's an example, New York State Standard. This is the Life Science Standard 1 sub-2. And the standard is plan and conduct an investigation to determine how familiar plants and/or animals use their external parts to help them survive in the environment. And so you can see here the science and engineering practices in blue, and the disciplinary core idea or the content and concept is in purple, right? So often the standard is asking kids to do both of those at the same time. And so when we're thinking about project-based learning after school as a remediation or extension opportunity, we can look to the curriculum, we can look to the standards, and we can see how can we do activities that are aligned to what kids are on the hook for during the school day, if that's a priority for your program. So I'm just going to pause there for a second. Any questions about the science, the standards, or the DCIs as a potential lens to think about how to choose or select programming? Okay, great. So we're going to move on. So next thing I want to think a little bit about is like incorporating STEM projects into your program. There are a couple different considerations, right, that we might think about here. So the first is scheduling and student groupings. And wait a second here. Yeah. Okay. So the first is purpose, right? So we talked about this a little bit before. Like, what are you trying to accomplish? And what you're trying to accomplish will determine whether or not you're anchoring on the standards or whether you're going up for projects that expose student to areas of choice. Now, you can pick any topic that kids are interested in and still have it focus on science practices, right? Like modeling or engineering or interpreting data. But whether or not you're anchored to the standard is going to depend on the purpose. Another thing to think about is timing, right? So we work with after school programs who do this during clubs. So it's kind of like enrichment and kids can opt in. And we also have folks who do this as part of the core academic program. It's something that all kids get access to because we're trying to provide access for additional academic support. Um, and then something else to think about is sort of your students also, right? Is this something that is like a core tenet of our program that we want all kids to have at bats with? Is this something that we want to have as an opt-in opportunity for choice? Or is this something where kids who need certain remediation during academic time will be opted in with guidance? And so another thing to think about is projects tend to work better when there's consistency. And so the deep learning happens when you get multiple at bats. And so you could do it one day a week and that would be fine. 2 days a week is better because kids are getting more at bats with the content. We have also found with our after school programming, right? Kids don't always come every day, right? So you may have a core group of kids who are there all the time. You may have a core group of kids who are not. And you may have some kids who come on certain days of the week, right? And so as you're thinking about your students you're serving and your scheduling, you also kind of want to think about, is there a way that I can schedule this for a group of students at a time they're most likely to be able to attend. Because we have found that when schools choose, like, oh, I'm going to do Wednesday, Thursday, and then they realize that half their kids are not there on Thursday, then all of a sudden that's a challenge, and now half your kids are behind the following Wednesday, right? Sometimes it's insurmountable, but sometimes with some careful scheduling, you can make sure that most of the kids can be there most of the time. So that's also something to just think about when doing a project with students. Um, some design considerations we're thinking about, and this is where we get into some of the integrating tips for STEM. So when you do a project, um, you can choose to do a project that's like a new activity, right? Like we're gonna do, Christina has dolphins in her profile, right? We're gonna do a project on how we can take action to support environmental conservation efforts for dolphins, for example. Um, and you might develop an entirely new project for that. You may also already have project units that you're doing in your after school program where they might not be project based, but with a little massaging, you can add a project based mission and a take action project at the end. That's sort of like upskilling existing programming to make it a little more project based. And it might already have STEM elements, or you might be able to add STEM elements to it. And so I think as we're going through these activities, I want to sort of acknowledge that like some of these could be used to enhance an existing thing you already do, and some of them could be used to inform like a new project or a new approach. Okay. So one thing to think about is like, how do we make sure we're really connecting learning to a mission or a purpose? This is the relevant why. So these are 6 examples of projects we have at Rock by Rock. Ugly Food and Hungry People asks how we can reduce food waste to address an issue of hunger in the community. It looks at the science standards related to plants and sustainability. It's a K through 2 project. And the mission is all about like helping address hunger. We have a Save Our Brains project. The mission is how can we reduce the impact of traumatic brain injury? And so kids learn about forces and motion and pushes and pulls, and then raising awareness about the impact that those things can have on our brain if we're in a bicycle accident or there's an injury. Save the Rainforest looks at how can we help reduce our impact on rainforests. So kids learn about ecosystems and adaptations in ecosystems and how human impact impacts the rainforest, and they do something to take action accordingly. Um, and so you may already have after school programs that could lend themselves to being repurposed for having a mission, and then which can help it be a more project-based approach. So one strategy is coming up with a really clear mission kids are going to be motivated by that also activates STEM skills and standards. And all of these projects for our end align with different science standards applicable in New York State. So another way to think about bringing in STEM into a project-based experience is tying art and science activities together in service of the mission, right? So one of our projects is Stop the Invasion, where kids look at the impact of invasive species on an ecosystem. So this looks at ecosystem and it's how can we help stop the spread of invasive species? We have a lot of invasive species in New York that kids could address with thinking about this. But for this particular project, kids learn about the Burmese python in the Florida Everglades, and they do a math activity here where they chart the impact of Burmese pythons by graphing what percentage of the native population Burmese pythons have consumed. Um, for example, like I think Burmese pythons have eaten something like 90% of the raccoons in the Florida Everglades at this point. So they're getting a science and math activity focused on ecosystems. But we also pair that activity with an origami, where kids make an origami model of one of the species impacted by pythons, and then they actually write a short description of how that species was impacted. And so another way to dial up STEM in your after school programming is through activities that combine art and science in a really engaging way. Another way to combine art and science in STEM project-based learning is through modeling, right? So one of our projects is Save the Elephants, and it looks at ways to support elephant ecosystems. And kids, one of the life science standards is to create a model of that shows the benefits of a species living in a herd. And so what we do is we have kids create a model, but they do it as a mosaic. So they're getting the art and the science together. And then they can also choose a style of a mosaic and bring in some of their personal background, right? And so you can bring in the art, the science standards, the art, and these would be activities that you could do in service of a larger project. Um, Another way to think about bringing in STEM is open-ended tasks. And these are things that you can do as part of a project-based experience. And so one of our projects focuses on ways to use creativity in problem solving. So our Stop the Invasion project will look like the spread of invasive species. In stopping invasive species often requires creative problem solving. So as a way of building creativity for kids, kids do a challenge to think creatively, think outside the box. And so we do an engineering challenge where they design a structure using spaghetti and marshmallows to see who can design the tallest structure. Now, the art activities are more structured, right? Origami is very step by step, right? Creating a mosaic gives you a box, right? Like this is the objective. Use these art materials to accomplish this objective. In this scenario, here's a set of materials, go, right? It's very open-ended. And what we find is that this really pushes kids to think critically and outside their comfort zone. The number of second grade teachers who I've spoken to who say, I give my kids an open-ended task, and their first reaction is to shut down because they're so used to following directions with a step-by-step guide. Like this is a great way after school to really push kids to expand their thinking. Another way to do that is actually instead of individual activities, is actually through the final project, right? A great way to culminate a project-based experience is to actually have kids create an invention or a prototype that solves the problem. And in that case, it's a very open-ended challenge because his kids have to design a prototype or an invention from scratch. And so promoting open-ended tasks through your after-school programming is also a great way to start to integrate project-based elements that support the science and engineering practices. Um, Another way to think about it is to spiral or deepen knowledge, right? And so if kids are working towards solving a problem, we want them to be able to understand the problem and then be able to do something with that information. So we have a project called Plastic Everywhere, where it looks at how can we reduce the impact of single-use plastics. Um, and in that project, kids do a couple of different things. They learn about the history of plastic. They learn about the benefits of plastic. They learn that there are a lot of places where plastic is actually really helpful for preserving food or for like in medical situations. And then they do an activity where they're actually charting how much plastic they use and then creating a selfie, which is a hands-on activity showing how much plastic they use. And they're thinking about in their selfie, what are the things where like this is actually mission critical to my life? And where are there places where it's not, where maybe I could use less? And so one of the ways also to layer in STEM into your programming is to engage kids in reading activities or interactive activities that lead to something hands-on, right? Now, you might not be at a place where you can do a full project-based experience, but you could do a week-long cycle where you're building information that's culminating in kids doing a hands-on activity as a stepping stone towards doing a project. Um, Finally, all of our projects end with something where kids take action. And that take action could be a model, it could be a podcast, it could be a news story, it could be an interactive museum exhibit. And all of those are ways to implement and increase STEM in their learning. So what you see here is an example of one of our after school programs where kids did the Save the Penguins project that actually culminates in creating a diorama that raises awareness about how some of our actions impact penguins. It's one of our K2 projects. And so adding a take action project is also a great way to integrate STEM as part of your project-based learning experience. And so again, all of the strategies I just shared, they can be used to help you adapt an existing unit that you do by adding a mission, adding a final project, and integrating some of these STEM activities. They can also be used to inform planning a new project-based experience that you want to do or that you want to try. And then finally, you could get something off the shelf. Like Rock by Rock is an off the shelf solution. You don't need to use Rock by Rock, right? But it is a way to make project-based learning easier. And what we often find is I know we have some folks on the call where you're 50% project-based. That's great. Hope maybe these strategies are things that you could use to enhance the project-based components and increase STEM in your programming. And for folks who might not be project-based at all, but you're looking to adding STEM project-based elements, my advice would be start small, right? Like start with one class, start with one group, start with one unit, and then sort of build from there. Because it's easier to kind of like learn as you go than it is to say, like, we're going to go hook, line, and sinker on everything tomorrow. Um, and especially because I know some after school programs are staffed by teachers from the day, they're the school day. And some after school programs are staffed by other guides, some who may have a lot of education experience and some who might not have much at all, right? And so you might also want to think about like where you start based on the readiness of the staff who are ready to take on certain activities. Um, I also have some guidance and some tips about how to think about planning a project. But before I go into that, I'm just going to pause and see if there are any questions about anything that I've shared so far. Okay, great. So I'm going to share my screen again. Um, and uh, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but I'm going to give you a guide that has a summary of all of this as a reference. But if you're thinking about planning your own project, you're going to want to think about the mission, right? And in the mission, you can plan the mission ahead of time because you have certain standards you want to meet, or the mission can come from your kids and you can follow their interests if you want to do something choice-based. Same thing for the final take action project. You're going to want to think about whether or not you want all students to work together towards one project or whether or not kids are going to be able to create their own. Um, and then when you're planning a project, most projects follow a similar arc, right? What's the problem? Why is it happening? What are possible solutions? What solution will you create? How will you share that solution and how will you reflect? So if you're going to design your own project, that's the way to think about it. And then there's activities and methods. And when we're planning a project-based opportunity, especially in STEM, we think about what's the mission, what's the final project, and then what are 4 to 5 anchor activities that will get kids from A to B, that will get kids from the mission, understanding the problem and being able to take action. And what are 2 to 3 articles or books that you can read or engage in together that'll deepen their understanding? And so if you're looking for like a scrappy, low lift way to try it out on your own, pick the mission based on your need, pick a take action that will be highly motivating for kids to solve the problem. And then think about what are some core activities and readings that you could engage in that will support the mission that you chose. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a little bit about what we offer to so that you can see how we support STEM-based project-based learning, both in school and after school, and then you can decide whether or not this is something you might want to pilot or try in your setting. So now I'm going to go to our website. This is the Rock by Rock website. And our goal really is to try and make project-based learning affordable and accessible for everybody. And our platform was designed to work with experts and novice teachers. And we've used this with folks everywhere from a college tutor with no experience to a veteran teacher with 30 years of experience. And so on our platform, we have a library of projects that support kindergarten and second grade. And you can see there's a wide range of topics. They all anchor in STEM and they all support reading, writing, listening, and speaking. We also have a bank of 3rd through 5th grade projects, also all anchored in STEM. Like Too Much Gaming looks at should we play more or less video games, and it looks at light and sound and how our brain processes information, and how video games are actually designed to keep you playing. And in some ways that might be good, and in some ways maybe not. We have another project that looks at wild weather. So how do the science of weather and how that impacts natural disasters and weather that we might experience locally and globally. Another project, Sugar, Sugar Everywhere. This looks at states of matter and phase change and chemical and physical adaptations, but it does it through the lens of what are the positive and negative impacts of sugar? Because sugar has a lot of scientific benefits. And also, too much of it, we know, also has impact, right? And so kids are actually answering the question, is sugar a hero or a villain? And then doing something to raise awareness about what they learned, right? So all of the projects anchor around real world topics and mission kids are interested in. And then for the projects themselves, each project, so if I were to click in to save the elephants, it takes me to the project overview page. You can see the mission. How can we help save elephants from extinction? You can see each project has a life habit focus, which is a 21st century skill: empathy, problem solving, curiosity, critical thinking, creativity. Um, each project culminates in something where kids do something to take action. So in this case, it's writing a letter to Congress, but it could also be any one of a number of projects. And this is actually also modular. So you might decide we don't want to do the letter to Congress. We want to do an interactive museum exhibit, and you can do that. And then the projects feature virtual experts in 3rd through 5th grade. So when kids are learning about elephants, they do an asynchronous virtual visit to the Birmingham Zoo, and they learn about how the zoo supports conservation globally. And then when they're writing the letter to Congress, they meet a state senator, Tony Vargas, who teaches kids about letter writing and empathy and how it's an authentic skill. So kids are also getting career exposure to experts who are teaching them about the learning. Each project comes with a mission log, which is a record of learning. So all of the hands-on activities are actually in the mission log. So everything kids are doing in the program after school can be tracked in that offline booklet. There's a real simple to use teacher's guide. We're teachers ourselves, and we develop this in partnership with teachers and leaders. The number one thing we heard is I need the quick and dirty thing to help me get going. And literally, you could like open this project and learn alongside your kids. This is not a 600-page script on how to use the unit. And then all of our projects for the hands-on materials use off-the-shelf materials that most folks have ready access to. Cardboard, scissors, colored pencil, index cards, rubber bands, plastic wrap, yarn, metal fork. So you can do the STEM activities without needing to buy expensive STEM kits. And then the lessons themselves are organized in an online LMS. And some of our after-school programs have devices and some don't. And in the cases where they don't, they actually have kids working in a small group looking at the teacher's device. And so on the handout I'm going to give you, this is actually a picture in the, no, it's not. It's at the beginning. Oh, it's at the beginning of my slide deck. This is a picture of one of our after school programs in Greece outside Rochester. And the instructor is using the online materials with a group of kids, but not all the kids have a device. And so you can access both the online and hands-on in different ways. And then the content itself that kids are looking at is organized in this online LMS. So there are jokes. We use text message chats to introduce the key ideas. A lot of our folks do readers theater with the text message chats. A lot of our reluctant readers like doing the dialogue because it's more accessible for them. There are interactive videos and activities. In this case, kids are meeting folks at the Birmingham Zoo who are teaching them how they support elephant conservation and elephant herds. In this case, like kids are then making their model mosaic so they can learn what a mosaic is. They see that online. They have some examples of mosaics, and then they go to their mission log and they actually do the mosaic in the mission log where it shows them the hands-on activities and how to do that. And you'll see again here, you can make a mosaic with any number of things based on the materials you have accessible. And so kids go through a series of these online activities. There's also each project features an anchor text. So if your after school is also trying to support literacy in addition to STEM, there are opportunities for kids to do authentic reading. And what we usually hear from our teachers and our after school programs is that because this doesn't feel like what kids are doing during the day, and because it's giving at-bats with reading and writing, kids are motivated by the why and the mission. So they want to do the reading and they want to do the writing that's included in a project. And the last thing I'll show you real quick before I pause is that I told you Save the Elephants, the project that comes bundled is Letter to Congress, right? But for third through fifth grade, we also have a bank of take action projects. And so let's say you want to focus on persuasive writing because maybe your kids need more support with writing a claim and supporting it with evidence. You could do a pitch or a public service video. You don't have to do the letter to Congress. And so we have a whole bank of take action projects that you could use. Now, you may also have existing programming that you want to add a take action project to. You could keep an existing unit and add one of these take action projects on top of that as a way to also enhance project-based learning, right? And so Regine is a comic book writer for Marvel in DC. Karen is a picture book writer who's published several children's books. Karima Grant is a museum designer. Edward is a Philly muralist, right? So kids are also getting to learn. Rami is a reporter for CBS. He's a foreign correspondent in London. So whatever you choose, kids are learning skills for that project from an expert. So they're also getting career exposure and learning from folks in the field. And so if you're interested, um, and you can either put your email in the chat now and let me know and we'll follow up, or you can email me at my email address at jeffreyemrick@rockbyrock.com. And what we would do is we would set you up with access to the full library for the rest of the school year. So you could do a pilot, and we'd also be happy to do a 60-minute onboarding to train any staff you wanted to have access to it. So my hope is that this gives you an opportunity to see some of the ideas about how you can add PBL to your programming, how you can support STEM, but also what we offer in case it's a value add to you and it's something that you'd like to try. And so I promised Abby we'd get through this in 45 minutes. We're 1 minute ahead of schedule. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, see if any folks have additional questions. All right, Christine and Louis, I see that you've put your emails in. That's great. So I will follow up with you. Yeah, appreciate everybody joining today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff. You did really good with the 45 minutes. You give so much information and resources. I really appreciate it. I'm gonna still leave time for if anyone has questions right now, but I'm also gonna share in the link or share in the chat our post survey. Just if you wanted to
Okay.
give us feedback, Jeffrey, or the STEAM skills webinar themselves. But go
Great.
ahead and ask questions if you have any.
Yes, and I also put in a chat a PDF that has some of the tips and strategies we talked about. So if you want to use that as a reference point, you can have access to that going forward.
You know, if I didn't, I might have sent that incorrectly, actually. Sometimes I send them.
Yeah, but feel free to come off mute or put questions in the chat if there's anything I can help answer. And I'll also say I love working with folks in New York State because New York's my home, and it all is it and see how things are going and help out if there are things that we can do to support your program. So